Hello, I'm Jo Vraka. Welcome back to the Unright podcast. Thanks for joining me today. Really special episode. I think I say that about every episode, but this is a pretty cool one. I sat down with a few of my girlfriends recently because I wanted to have a chat with them about their experience in the world being childless women. These three women, my friends, come from very different backgrounds, even culturally. So obviously you know my Italian culture. Then we have Mariecris. So she's 38, she's Filipino, and she's currently engaged and has been married once before. There's a lot of cultural pressure in her community for women to have babies and grow big families. But Mariecris is the first to admit that she's done a lot of personal development work, so she hasn't let that pressure influence her, but she does want kids. So she's currently starting IVF. Then we've got Lauren. Lauren's family is the complete opposite from, say, mine and Mariecris's in that she was always told that she could do whatever she wanted, whatever felt right. So Lauren's 34, she's married, and at the moment she's still undecided, but she knows that she's starting to get to the pointy end of her fertility. So she wants to make a decision soon so that she can either go for it or go on with her life and not give it any more thought. And then we've got Laura. Laura is 42, a British emigre. She's been married once before, but she's currently single. And wow, she probably got more pressure from her mum to not have children. Hers is a really interesting story in that regard, I must admit. So stay tuned for that. So one of the parts of this conversation that I found really interesting is that when Lauren talks about having to decide, there's so much pressure on women to make a decision. But is this pressure actually placed on men? So I really hope that we're listening to the four of us talk about our experience. And let me tell you, this is something that we'd never discussed before. Now, I do know that Mariecris was going to be looking at IVF, so I did know that, but we didn't really talk about the idea of us all being childless or child-free, depending on how we look at it on the day. So I really hope that by listening to this conversation, I hope that it helps you to see that even though we have this one thing in common, which is childlessness, we're so different. And we want you to know, though, that you're not alone, that we all have these thoughts one way or the other. Your thoughts are not unusual. They're actually quite common. I hope you enjoy this conversation. It's a bit of a fireside chat, and I just want you to know that there were four of us sharing two microphones, so the sound can get pretty iffy sometimes. I do apologise. That's not the normal way that we produce the show. But I really hope you hear these stories and they give you hope. Wow. Super Sunday Sessions, Oprah, Eat Your Heart Out. I've got some special guests in the studio with me today, and I'm really excited because I've never done this before, and I've got three amazing women, very accomplished businesswomen, and lots of other things that they've done, and I'd like to introduce you to them. They're all at different stages of their journey with, I did use the J word, journey with being childless, child-free, and thought we'd have a bit of a conversation, see where we're up to with that. So firstly, I would like to introduce you to Mariecris. Mariecris, say hi.
Hi, everyone.
Hey. And then we've got Lauren.
Hi, everyone.
And Laura.
Hey, how are you going?
Thanks for coming today, guys. I know this was really spontaneous. We were having lunch and I thought, oh, how fun would it be to have a bit of a chat? Because really it's a subject that we don't really talk about much. And I know there's a lot more to us women than whether we do or don't have kids. But it is a topic that obviously is very important to me and to a lot of women out there, to be honest. So firstly, I just wanted to go around the table, if that's all right, and just sort of talk about where you are in your, again, we'll use the word journey because everyone knows what it means, in your journey in terms of whether you've decided to have children, not have children, and what that means to you. So let's start with Laura.
Wow, what a responsibility. So I am 42 years old. I don't have children. And to be honest, it's a bit of a shock to kind of almost wake up and be 42 years old and to be single and not have children. It wasn't exactly that I planned it that way. I'd much rather be kind of almost not be in this situation, particularly being single at 42 wasn't my decision. And then around the whole children thing, I was married previously and my ex-husband and I decided that we were going to start a family, and we went and had an appointment with the doctor to go and discuss this kind of in more detail. I then arranged a further appointment to get my contraceptive removed, and in between that time my sister announced in the UK that she was going to get married and asked me to be her bridesmaid, and the wedding was in about 12 months time. So my husband at the time and I decided that we would put off having children and then revisit it kind of after the wedding. A couple of months after my sister got married, my husband and I decided that we were going to end our marriage and end our relationship. So I guess after that, I got into another kind of long-term relationship. He actually had 4 children who were all grown up, and he was about 13 years older than me and had a vasectomy and didn't want any more children. And at the time, I thought, well, I don't necessarily need to be a mum. His children have got a perfectly amazing mother. But how cool would it be to be a role model in someone else's life, or to be kind of that extra person that they've always, someone else has always got their back. They can always come to me. And I had hoped that I would be a part of that family and part of those children's lives. That didn't work out exactly as I'd expected either. So I guess now I'm 42, I'm on my own, and I don't have children.
Thank you so much, Laura. That was it's great. Thank you for sharing. Obviously, this is a subject that we haven't really talked about. Mariecris and I have talked about it a little bit, but the rest of us haven't, because as I've said, there's a lot more to us than whether we have kids or not, right? But it is a really important topic. So, Lauren.
So I am almost 34. So I have never been maternal. I've never kind of really thought about having children. It was never something that I ever kind of saw in my future. I am married, so we've been married for about 3 years or so. And I think it's something that my husband would like, but it's something that I'm quite ambivalent around. He has a son he had a son when he was a teenager. So, his son's in his 20s now. And I do think it's something that he would like. It's something that we've talked about, but it's never been something that we've come to a decision on. I would say that it's something that is a possibility, but, being 34, it's something that we have to make a decision about quite soon. But yeah, I guess it's not something, when I look at children, it's not something that I feel excited about. It's not something that I really see in my future. And I think the only reason that I'm considering it, obviously, is because my husband is keen on children. But yeah, it's not, I've never really had that maternal instinct. I've never really seen myself as being a mothering person, being a nurturing person. So I'm ambivalent about it, really.
It's not unusual. Thanks so much. Mariecris. A very different point of view, which I'm really excited to hear, because we always talk about, on this podcast, even though we've all got very different stories, we're always talking about the experience of like either wanting to have kids and then not having them, or not wanting to have kids. So I really welcome your experience, which is quite different.
Yes, so I am 38. When I say those words, it's like, oh my gosh, like.
Oh, shush, I'm 51, whatever. How did that happen?
But I got married super young. I'm from a Filipino background. Got married at 21. Was expected to have kids at 21 and a half, and buy the house and all that stuff. And I remember a really vivid memory from my past life with my ex-husband, where we bought the house, the double-story house. We filled it up with furniture. We did the whole thing, and it was time to fill it up with babies. Mm-hmm. And I remember sitting on the staircase thinking, I can't have this. This is not my life. This is like living this. This is not the life that I was supposed to have. And like at 21 or 25. So obviously that didn't work out. We ended up splitting up. He was desperately wanting to have kids, to the point where he was visualizing it. He bought clothes for kids, and I was just not there. And then I got into another relationship where the opposite happened, where I was sort of like, I could do kids. But he was definitely not interested in having kids. He didn't say it out loud. He wasn't a very black and white person. He was always in the grey. So I just hoped that he would come around eventually and say, yes, actually want to have kids. And then we broke up, and that was in 2015. And when we did, and I was around the 34 mark, I actually started thinking I want to have children. And being emancipated from this relationship, which we were together for about 8 years, allowed me the fact that I could actually have kids on my own. So I actually walked myself to the doctor and said, what do I do to get my eggs frozen? And how do I start that process? I started doing the process on my own. And then I met my partner now, who in the first month was already talking about kids. Super clucky, probably more maternal than I am in terms of desperately wanting to have kids. So we're actually going through the process now of starting IVF. So we've got the test done, and we're probably going to start the first round in early next year. Yeah, so really opposite ends, where I didn't want to have kids at 21. And I feel like it's probably more to do with the fact that people were telling me to have kids rather than it was my choice. Whereas now I'm just thinking, and obviously my partner and I both know the success rate of IVF, and it doesn't look 100% great. But I think there's this like overachiever in me.
You are going to get a baby. You're going to get a baby. I swear to God.
Not even that. Not even the fact that I am going to get a baby, but I just need to have tried. It's more that like I need to have tried, and if it doesn't work out, I'll be okay with it. But if it does, then I'll obviously be really okay with that too. It's more to have that, okay, just have this thing that I've ticked off in my head saying I've tried, it either worked out or didn't, but at least I know I gave it a go and I tried and I was open to it.
Yeah, thank you so much, really. It's interesting to me because, we've got 3 women here who sound like the 3 of us, you were for quite some time as well, Mariecris, quite ambivalent about have babies, don't have babies. I mean, I've told it before, I didn't want to have babies until, my friends started having babies later. A lot of, I've been married 26 years, as we know, but, a lot of my friends didn't get married until they were in their 30s and didn't start having babies until they were in, well into their mid-30s. So for me, babies weren't around. So I didn't start getting clucky until I was about 35 going, shit, am I going to run out of time if I do it now? We were talking about doing that, what Jodie Day was doing, which was, counting backwards going, all right, what's the latest age I can be to have a child? All right, maybe 45. Okay, I've got to meet someone. Now, I had met the person, but we just, neither of us ever wanted to have kids. It was just not a thing for us. So I think that, by the time I was 35, I think it was a bit of, social conditioning as well. People around me, you're thinking, I'm going to lose friends if I'm not part of that club, you know what I mean? All this stupid stuff that goes through your head. Of course, you can have relationships with women if you don't have kids, but you just go through that sort of stuff. But Laura, for you, what's interesting, and I don't know if you've ever heard the term before, but you are childless by circumstance, and another word, you're socially infertile. That is what you are. That is the term, Laura. You are socially infertile.
Well, that's pretty confronting.
Yeah, it is. So in here we've got, what am I? I'm just a geriatric whatever. I mean, I'm infertile. Well, I don't know anymore. I think I'm in the in-between where there's nothing. You know what I mean? You're still young and have plenty of time. So see the shit that we hear all the time. So you're a geriatric mother. You've got plenty of time and you might change your mind, Lauren. I don't know, Laura, sorry, but you're socially infertile, so I'm not sure where you're going to end up.
Far out.
I think it just says so much about patriarchy. I mean, I don't want to go into that hardcore feminist end, but this is what it is. It's like, again, Jodie was saying, and a lot of women are saying, she's at 58, I think now, and she's saying, there's no real term for women who are not mothers, right? We're either too picky. That's you, Laura. You're too picky. Lauren, ambivalent. You just waited too long now, Mariecris, and you're 37, 38. And, me, it's way too late. Laura, back to you. You're in a position where you're single at the moment. So do you think about whether you're going to freeze your eggs, or did you think you were going to be a mother at some point? Was that just a natural thought for you?
It was never top of the list of my priorities. My mum actually had me when she was very young. Both my sister and I, she had when she was very young. She'd literally just it was 2 days after her 22nd birthday, she had me. And when I was married. So I was married in my early 30s and then started talking about children. Surprisingly, my mum was so anti it and so against it. It was unbelievable. Words that came out of her mouth were, oh, children are such a bind, children, it's not the be all and end all. Everyone thinks it's great, but actually, you know, she made it out to be the worst experience and the worst choice you could possibly make. Even saying things like, you know, if I had my time again, probably wouldn't have had children. I mean, that's a little bit harsh.
You know, I'm an only child, right? My mother, almost every time I see her, which is almost every day, says to me, just be grateful you didn't have children. They're just terrible. And I'm like, Mum, I'm the only one you ever brought up. So what exactly is it that you're trying to say? So it sounds to me like your mum was kind of like, don't do that.
I wouldn't mind, but my sister and I we weren't bad kids, you know, like neither of us were into drugs or, you know, we were, you know, A-grade students and all the rest of it. So, yeah, I'm not really quite sure why she thinks that it was.
The grass is always greener, though. It's probably her own hopes and dreams unrealized, so it has nothing to do with you guys.
No.
It's just the stuff that she didn't allow herself to do.
Absolutely. And I think now, having gone through quite a bit of personal development in the past few years, I can really identify with that. But kind of 10 years ago, when I was in my early 30s, it had quite an effect on me, actually, kind of thinking, well, gosh, you know, I do love traveling. I do love kind of having those freedoms and having a whole bunch of options and choices. And the way my mum was speaking, it was kind of like, oh, that's gone, you know, like have kids or travel and do other things. There was never really that kind of midpoint where you could kind of do it all, I suppose.
That's really interesting. The messages that we're given as we're growing up really affect the way that we perceive life in general. I grew up thinking, you know, being a mum, my parents were just so angry, being migrants, you know, new migrants to Australia. They left everything behind. They were just angry all the time that they had left their society, their families, everything they knew. So why would I have had any positive thoughts about being a parent? What were your messages, Lauren, growing up?
It's an interesting question, actually. I think my experiences were quite different. So I'm an only child as well. My dad had children in kind of a previous relationship before he met my mum, but they were in Germany and he moved to Australia. So, you know, I have never met them or anything. But I always got really positive messages, and the relationship that we had as a family, it was always that you could do everything. I never got the message that my parents felt like having children was a curse or that it stopped them from doing anything. And particularly from my mum, like, you know, when I was little, my dad actually looked after me. She went to TAFE, she got another degree, she changed professions, and she was kind of always the breadwinner in the family. So she was the one that went out to work, and my dad, because we lived on a farm, so he kind of looked after me and did farm work. So I never kind of got that message that there was anything kind of restricting in life by having children. And we went to travel, we travelled overseas. I was kind of always involved in everything that they did. So I'm not actually sure where that kind of ambivalence towards children came from, but it was just never something that you know, even when I was little, I don't remember ever playing with dolls and pretending to be a mother, like in games that I played. It was just never something that I really thought of, but I don't really know where that came from.
Well, I wonder if the fact that you didn't have anyone telling you one way or the other actually allowed you the freedom to decide or not decide. You know, it sounds to me like you didn't have pressure.
Yeah, that would be very true. And I think because my parents were always very open-minded, so they were always very much like, you know, question everything, explore all your options, do whatever you want. So there was never they never pushed me in one way in life when it came to anything, like when it came to education or career choices or relationships I had or anything like that. They kind of were always like, you know, you'll just choose the best way and just explore all your options and do what you want and it will kind of all work out. But I think probably the only negative element of that was probably the fact that I feel like I haven't made a choice yet. And my preference would be to decide one way or the other rather than just kind of letting it play out. So what I've done up to this point is just been like, well, you know, if it happens, it happens. But I feel like at some point I need to make a choice, and then you close one part of your life, whether that's having children or not having children, and then you move on and you move forward as opposed to just kind of letting it happen.
That's really interesting. I remember before I decided to start trying, I went to a naturopath for just other unrelated things, and she said to me, we were just having a chat, and she said, whatever you do, just make a decision. Whether you decide not to or to do it, make sure it didn't just become too late. So yeah, that's a really interesting point. The fact that, you know, you haven't made the decision because you still can, right? Because you're 34.
It's still an option.
So you're at a bit of that point right now where you're,
Yeah, it's come to a head. You only have so long, right?
Yeah.
And then the last thing you want, I think, is to look back and feel like you should have made a choice, like you should have decided one way or the other. Because I think once you make that choice, then you come to terms with a life that could have been and then the life that you're choosing, as opposed to just letting it happen and then maybe having regrets later on.
Mariecris, your story is quite different. And I think you grew up with that notion that big families are really important.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. So much pressure. And even now, there's a lot of pressure within my family and even like Boris's family, my partner's family, where they don't have any grandchildren because his sister isn't having kids. She's type 1 diabetic. She had a conscious choice saying, no, it's actually not good for my health to have kids. But like I remember very clearly my first husband, my mum giving him sex tips
Oh my
on
God.
how to get me pregnant. So
I want to know, what did that sound like? What did you, hang on, were you there
like
at the time?
I was not there.
Did he tell you about it?
He told me
what
about
did he
it.
say? Tell us.
So first husband, and my mom pulled him aside and said, you know, you should like have a shower before you have sex and all this stuff, like just so that you don't. And like my ex-husband, he's quite funny. He was just like, what is happening? Like, I don't know what is happening. Like this was like less than a year. We had been married for less than a year. Wow. Even now, we're planning a wedding because we have just gotten engaged, and that's like we're looking at the budget and thinking, oh my gosh, this is going to cost us. And we made the decision together that we would try IVF first, and if that works, then it works, and we're going to do one round. And if it doesn't, then we'll have the wedding the following year and look at other options. But maybe it's because of all this personal development work I've done on myself for the last 20 years that I haven't felt the need to please them and have a baby. Wow. I really feel confident that I'm making this decision for myself. Yeah. And like I said, like even though there's maybe some pressures from even his family, like they haven't vocalized it. Obviously, it's the thing's there. It's in
the background.
Yeah, it's in the background. Like we haven't had it. And like we told my future mother-in-law that we were doing it that way. We're going to do the IVF first and then have the baby. She's like, smart girl. Hey! She said smart girl. And like that's like even though they're not vocalizing that they want, you know, a grandchild, to me that's like, oh shit, they're expecting one now that we've told them. But like I said, there's 40% chance now that IVF works, and Boris and I have talked about this a lot, like what if it doesn't work, because we've got a lot of family members that haven't had kids. One particular person that hasn't had a kid, and it's not fun. Like they've gone through IVF for 3 times, I think they've done. I mean, they might have spent 50,000, but it's just in the Filipino culture, it's definitely something that it's like you're a failure because we're all about the big family.
Thanks for that, Mariecris. I'm really interested in this whole idea about pressure from family and society. So, Laura, what about with you? So, when you were married, did you find that your family were like, hey, Laura, what's going on? Why, you know, did you find anything like that?
Not really. Even though I was probably in my early 30s, I never had any pressure from my family to have children at all. As I mentioned before, my mum was really actually probably putting pressure on me not to have children. No, look, she really didn't put any pressure on at all. But interestingly, I lost my dad earlier this year. My parents are divorced. Then my mum broke her arm earlier this year as well. She suddenly started talking about, oh gosh, you know, Laura, you're on the other side of the world. And, you know, I've really had to lean on, you know, she was talking, I need to lean on my husband to help me through these things. And gosh, I'm now really worried about you. If anything kind of happens to you over in Australia, you know, you don't have any family around you. You don't have kids. You don't have anyone. And it's now almost kind of the shoes on the other foot type thing. She's now saying, you know, we're really worried that you're by yourself. I'm like, oh, great. God, thanks.
So my question is, are you really worried that you're by yourself?
Yeah, I am actually. I think, again, the trauma that I've gone through this year with losing parents. And look, I nursed my dad pretty intensively for the last 5 weeks of his life. And there were certainly numerous times throughout that process that I actually thought, shit, if/when anything like this happens to me, I literally have got no one around. And whilst, the logical side of your brain starts going, well, that's not a reason to have children, Laura, it doesn't stop me worrying about it.
But don't you feel like you've got other family members, like you've got your little brother that loves you, that looks up to you? Because that's how I think. Because if I don't have kids, I've got like a sister and a brother-in-law and a brother with nieces and nephews. And maybe this is a positive of my Filipino culture, that I don't think that my immediate family is my family. Like there's always going to be someone around to help me if I don't choose to have kids. So I've never felt like I'll be lonely that way. So that's why I thought, well, I don't really need if I have kids, it's okay. If I don't, it's okay too, because I will have an extended family who will be there for me.
So what this has brought to my attention is that we need to build communities. So regardless of what those communities look like, you're an only child. Thank you for telling me that. I'm an only child. I told you the story of my parents telling me about how I'm going to be alone one day, and I should think about the fact that I'm going to be alone one day. So yeah, thanks. I do think about that, right? We all think about it though. We're all going to be alone in one way or another at some point. Your kids might go off to university and in a different town or whatever it is. So what sort of legacy and community can we build as women where we can be looked after? Have any of you watched Grace and Frankie with Lily Tomlin and Jane Fonda? One's 76 and one's 80. And it is amazing actually, because they're talking about things like they're both really fit women, right? But they're not denying the fact that they're fucking 80 and 76. But they're talking about, what happens to us? One of their friends became a widow and she went and moved into an aged community because she needs people around her. Like we do need to look at that level of advocacy for either single women or partner women who either might end up on their own or still two old people in a relationship, you know what I mean, without anyone looking after you. We do need to look at what's that going to look like for some of us, in our 70s and 80s.
I think it looks pretty amazing.
It does look, it can look really amazing. It can look amazing. You're right.
We've got a family friend, Boris's family has a family friend that they're well into their 80s and they live in this aged care facility and it's like a resort. They have a great life. He's in his 80s, she's in her late 70s and she's still traveling to Europe prior to COVID, obviously. She'd go off and do her own thing. And I think as we get older too as a society in Australia and less of us have kids, there'll be services out there that would actually serve those type of people.
Mariecris, you've been trying to have kids and it hasn't been successful. So you're now pursuing the IVF channel. You mentioned that if that doesn't work out, that you would be okay with it.
Look, gosh, I probably need some therapy like anybody. But I can't say how I would feel once I've gone through that. So obviously you don't know what will happen and how you'll take it. Like it's just like parenthood. You could plan for it and prepare for it. But when it actually happens and it's not successful, I'm not sure. I think the positive thing is that we've kept the communication open between us so there's no expectations of it. And we're in a really fortunate position where if we're going to spend that kind of money, it's not the end of the world. Whereas we've had friends in the past where they're putting all their life savings into something that's not a sure thing. And it's probably only this relationship, and that's probably because where I'm at in my journey, it's not the partner, it's always starts with you, that I feel ready to be a mother, and however that looks like. But that nurturing side has finally come out. And that probably came out before I met Boris, when I walked myself to the doctors and said, how do I go about freezing my eggs and making that decision for myself? And I think even if I wasn't with Boris, I would go down this path. I don't know, I can't tell you how, give me 6 months and I'll let you know. But we have kept the communication open to say if it happens, cool. If not, what else would life look like? And life would still look pretty awesome without the kids. I mean, we're planning to travel, move overseas. So it's not like the kids for us is the be all and end all, which I feel a lot of the people in our circle of friends and family, it is. And they almost break up because of it. And it's almost like you talk to them about it and you can't talk to them about it because they get so sad. And I don't want to be that person. And I can't guarantee that I'm not going to be that person. I'm consciously thinking about it now that I don't want to be that person. If that doesn't happen, then it's not meant to be. But we have other things in our life that fulfill us already. And I feel like right now I'm pretty fulfilled and pretty happy with where my life's at. But like I said at the start, it's probably just my overachiever personality that I just want to make sure I've tried everything. And at least in my head, I've already ticked that box. Yeah. It's almost like making the decision and I can move on.
What about you, Lauren? Would you pursue medical intervention?
I don't think that would be for me. Yeah. I think because being a mother is not something that I ever dreamt about, I feel like if it doesn't happen naturally, then that will just kind of be the end of it for me, and that will be my choice made. It's interesting though, conversations like this, I don't know, they always make me think motherhood, the way that I think about it at least, and there's no right or wrong way, it's just my own personal view. Motherhood is just one element of a life. And I mean, just because you're a woman doesn't mean that you should or shouldn't be a mother. But, sometimes it becomes this all-consuming thing that determines something about you as a person or your self-worth. Whereas the way that I look at it is it's one element and it's important. But, equally there's some people who choose to work or not work, and that's just one element of their life, but it doesn't determine who they all are or how worthy they are. So I don't know, and I think maybe that has contributed also to the fact that I haven't made a decision about being a mother or not, because it's not something that I even really think about that much. I think maybe in the back of my mind I'm just well, if it happens naturally it happens, and if it doesn't it doesn't. But because I haven't put a yardstick against that, it's not something that's overly important. But then sometimes I have that thought coming back to what we were talking about earlier, where what happens if you get to 60 and you're in a hospital and you're all by yourself, and who is that person who is there for you if you don't have a partner? And, being an only child as well, and not having...
And we're going to be alone.
And we're going to be alone, proper alone. So what happens then? But then looking at the example of my parents, they have a really strong social network because it's only me and they live in Queensland and I live in Victoria. It's not like I'm there looking after them all the time, and they're in their kind of late 60s, 70s. But they've built a really strong network of people through the social activities and the charity work and things that they do. And, they have a good friend who was in her 80s and her partnership broke down and she moved into a retirement village, and she is the happiest person that she's ever been, and she lives by herself in a little unit. And because it's a retirement village and there's lots of people in a similar situation, she does more socially than what she has ever done. And she has people constantly coming over for dinner. They do lots of activities, and she, when you see her now, she looks younger in her 80s than what she looks like when she was with someone in her 60s and 70s.
Laura, do you think you're going to freeze some eggs? Do you think about that sort of thing? Should I freeze some eggs? Are my eggs ready to hatch? What's going on?
There was a time when I got divorced and I was in my mid-30s, and I did have a conversation about freezing my eggs. I went to see a gynecologist and spoke about that then, but never really pursued that as kind of an option. I think I'm come to terms with the fact that it's not for me. It never really was a massively kind of huge priority. When my sister announced that she was getting married and we weren't going to try for kids for another year, it wasn't I was actually okay with that. At the time, there were quite a few of my friends that were having children, and it was almost kind of I was just, it's awful to say, but I was following kind of what everyone else was doing at the time. And then kind of fast forward a couple of years from then, it was, okay, well, maybe I should freeze my eggs. And I wanted to have the choice that Lauren was kind of talking about earlier. But as I've gotten older and then going through that other relationship with the guy that had 4 children, it kind of went out of my mind to have my own kids. And now, where I'm at now, I kind of come to terms with the fact that it won't be for me. I've got a lot of friends who don't have children, whether that's kind of by choice or what was the term you called me?
Socially infertile.
Yes, yeah. Some of my other socially infertile friends. And I don't actually think I'm going to tell them that. I think I might just keep that to myself.
By the way, this is the socially infertile group.
The support group.
Me and my other socially infertile friends. Yeah, look, I'm not bent out of shape over not having kids or not having children. right now. There is part of me that kind of wonders if, in a few years' time, if that's going to be a different story. But at the moment, I'm kind of okay with it. And knowing that I'm 42 and single, the likelihood is it's not going to happen. It's more likely that I would meet someone who does have children, albeit older. I've got a fantastic life here in Australia at the moment. I'm absolutely loving every single day of my life. I'm not sure that I will stay in Australia forever. I'm a bit of a nomad like that. Australia is the 7th country that I've lived in so far. Yeah, I've got plans to kind of go I haven't got set plans, but I've got ideas to kind of go and live in other countries. Very happy in Australia at the moment, but don't think that it'll be somewhere where I'll stay forever. But then who knows? Who knows what's around the corner?
Ladies, thank you so much. I know it was impromptu. I know I didn't warn you, but I really appreciate it. As I said at the start, it's subjects that we don't really sit around talking about. I'm really grateful to have had the 4 of us together. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having us, Jo. Thank you.
Thank you, Jo. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
I loved having a chat with these ladies. I hope you enjoyed listening to them as well. I look forward to talking to you again when I have Mina with me. Can't wait for you to hear her again. It's been a while, Mina. Where are you, Mina? She's coming back, don't worry. My question of the week that I'll be posting in our Facebook page and group is, do you talk to your girlfriends about your childlessness? Is this something that comes up? Are there lots of women around you who simply don't talk about childlessness? And if they did, maybe you'd get closer. Maybe we could all feel like, we're a lot more normal than we realise. Have a great week, everyone. Catch you later. Bye. I'd love you to join the community on Facebook and Instagram, which is @UnripeCommunity. And if you're childless or child-free, you're welcome to join the private group, which you'll find a link to on the Facebook page. If you want to share a story or let me know what topics you'd like to hear more about, please drop me an email at hellounripe@gmail.com. And don't forget, if you enjoyed the show, leave a review on your favourite podcast app, including iTunes and Spotify, so other people can find us. The website is where you'll find a little bit more about me, plus all the show notes. Go to unripecommunity.com.au.